Hi everyone. We're going to continue on the chain of infection, and we've talked about susceptible host and infectious agent and then gone to reservoir. What I'd like to talk about in the next video is the concept of portal of exit and portal of entry. So let's first define portal of exit, and that's going to be how the route through which the pathogen leaves the host. The portal of exit is the route by which the pathogen leaves the host. And so here's a diagram from your book, and it's showing here that it depends on the pathogen. If it's going to leave through the respiratory tract, some pathogens are actually picked up by insects as they bite you. How do you get malaria? Somebody has malaria, a mosquito bites them, picks up some of their blood, they bite you, and they transfer a little bit of that person's blood to you. So insect bites can be a portal of exit. Blood products. Sometimes people get exposed to other people's blood products. Very frequently, if somebody's infected with the pathogen, they're going to be shedding it in their urine and or their feces. So that's really common. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we have a kind of a inborn aversion to urine and feces, because quite frequently pathogens are shed that way. So we want to stay away from skin cells, and open lesions can spread pathogens. So it's just going to depend on the pathogen, where it's in the body, and where the infection's occurring, of where it's the portal of exit's going to be. So it's just going to vary depending on the pathogen. The portal of entry can also be really important to know. Again, so when we were going through the COVID pandemic, let me just go back to COVID, to the portal of exit. When we were going through the COVID pandemic, one of the big things was how do we prevent the spread of the disease? Well, we can break that chain of infection if we can prevent it from leaving the portal of exit. So what did we do? We wore masks, and we tried to reduce the amount of coughing and droplets that came from coughing and sneezing. The portal of entry, and again, during COVID, we tried to protect our portals of entry. The portal of entry is going to be, where does that pathogen enter the patient? And sometimes it's not that intuitive, but sometimes it is. So we'll go through some of these and you'll see which ones are. So we're going to look at the common portals of entry, and the ones I want you to be familiar with are skin, gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, and urogenital tract. When we talk about the skin as a portal of entry, the skin itself is a pretty good barrier. If it wasn't, we would be getting a lot more infections than we do. The skin has that keratin, the waterproofing protein that prevents microbes from going through the skin easily. But a common way to become infected is through cuts in the skin or through insect bites. So there are a few organisms that can get through the skin, but it's not common. So it's usually through a cut or an insect bite. And if we look at the skin right here, it talks about some of the pathogens that can get through nicks, abrasions, punctures, broken skin, and even just a little bit of broken skin, microscopic broken skin can be enough. Remember, bacteria are really small. Viruses are even smaller. So you don't need a large cut to allow microbes into your system. Here's herpes simplex type 1. That's a cold sores through the mucous membranes of the lips. I'm recovering from one of those right there. And so somewhere along the line, I got some of that virus that went through the little cracks in my lips, or through the mucous membranes. They have worms that burrow through the skin, viruses that can be introduced, or other organisms introduced by insect bites. So there's all sorts of things that can enter the body that can use the skin as a portal of entry. Again, usually through a cut. The main way pathogens acquire access to the body, though, are through the mucous membranes. And these would be the gastrointestinal tract. So that starts with your mouth, goes all the way through to your anus, all the way down your esophagus to your stomach, intestines, and out of the body. The respiratory tract, from your mouth to your trachea to your lungs. And the urogenital tract, the urinary tract, the kidneys, the bladder, the kidneys, the bladder, the urethra, and your reproductive organs. So all of these are lined with mucous membranes. And if we look at the gastrointestinal tract, what kind of organisms use that as the portal of entry? Well, Salmonella, E. coli, poliovirus can use that. And this is through eating and drinking contaminated foods. We've all had foodborne illnesses, that we ate something that didn't agree with us. And that can be both viruses and bacteria, as well as protozoans. The respiratory tract, this is bacteria causing meningitis, influenza, measles, mumps. This is one of those that I said isn't always really intuitive, because we think about chickenpox, where you get all these spots all over your skin. But how did the virus get in your body? Well, it actually came in through the respiratory tract. One of the reasons why the smallpox virus, even though it's been eliminated from the planet, or from the human population in general, we're still worried about it, because it can be, if somebody did want to use it as a biological weapon, it's very easy to spread, because the portal of entry is the respiratory tract. So we can breathe it in and get smallpox all over us. And I think that disease has like a 30% death rate. So some of these respiratory diseases can be very, very dangerous and easy to spread. Urogenital tract, you can probably think of some pathogens that use that as a portal of entry. Any sexually transmitted disease like HIV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, genital warts, lots of different sexually transmitted diseases. And so it says can enter through skin, mucosa of penis, external genitalia, etc. And may go through an unbroken surface, just through the mucous membranes or through a cut or abrasion. One of the things we find, particularly with sexually transmitted diseases, is when a person has one sexually transmitted disease, the irritation that's been that's caused in the mucous membranes can actually make them more susceptible to others. So these are the main portals of entry. Now, if you look at all of these, the skin and these three different mucous membranes, and think about any disease you've had, in the past 5 years, any infection, and see if you can figure out what the most common portal of entry is. I think most people would come to respiratory tract. And respiratory tract is, think you might have gotten COVID, you might have gotten the flu, you've probably had a cold. And so the respiratory tract is the most common portal of entry in human diseases. One of the other things I want to talk about related to portal of entry is the concept of infectious dose. And we can use that term infectious dose, and you can call it ID. In your book just says infectious dose. We can, there's actually a more specific term that's ID 50. And what that means is the infectious dose is the number of units of pathogen needed to infect a person. Specifically, ID 50 is the number of units of pathogen needed to infect 50% of exposed individuals. But for our purpose, infectious dose is the number of units of a pathogen needed to infect an individual. That varies depending on the pathogen, and it can vary depending on the portal of entry. One example that varies a lot with portal of entry is anthrax. And so the infectious dose of anthrax is much lower through the respiratory route. But you can actually get anthrax, a skin infection, or you can get a GI infection, and you need a lot more anthrax bacteria to cause the skin or the gastrointestinal tract infection. And just the portal of entry is going to have a big impact on how severe that disease is. So breathing in the bacteria that causes anthrax is much more dangerous. Here's some examples of some foodborne diseases. And it shows you here, if you consume 1 to 10 norovirus particles, 50% of people are going to become infected. And norovirus is a virus that is really common, that you've probably, most people have never heard of, or a lot of people have never heard of. If you've ever heard of any recent cruise ships that have been grounded because so many people are getting sick in there, so much foodborne illness, a lot of times that has been norovirus. Norovirus is just a really common foodborne virus. You've probably had it. And not even realized it, because you get sick, you get diarrhea, vomiting, and then you get better. But you can see here that it takes very little norovirus to enter the body for somebody to actually get that infection. So this is something that would be really easy to contract. If we look at some of the different kinds of E. coli, there's this one is the one that is really a really bad foodborne E. coli that can cause kidney failure. And you can see it doesn't take very much of that EHEC E. coli to cause that foodborne illness. But if you look here, this enterotoxigenic E. coli, it takes a lot more E. coli cells to cause a disease. So the infectious dose is much higher for this, and so you're less likely to contract that illness. And this is just something important to understand about how much risk are you willing to take. Here, Giardia, probably a lot of you have heard of that. It causes, people can get it from drinking natural water. Animals can shed it in their feces. And so you're out camping and you want to drink something from a creek, drink some water from a creek. A lot of people don't take the risk, because even if you consume 1 Giardia cell, you're likely to contract Giardia. Okay, so the infectious dose varies tremendously, not only from the different portals of entry, but from pathogen to pathogen. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is something that, again, this is in your book. And I just wanted to discuss some of the factors in the microbe and the host that will determine if an encounter with the pathogen will result in a disease. And so this is figure 11.5 from your textbook. And it has some kind of interesting things if you take some time and look at it. It's talking about the characteristics of the microbe and the characteristics of the host combine to determine if the host is going to get sick. And so here it talks about virulence. We talked a little bit about that. And here's the infectious dose. And so if the organism has very low virulence and you've only been exposed to a very small percentage of the infectious dose, and the correct portal of entry has not been accessed by the pathogen, the likelihood that you're going to get sick is very low, even if the person is susceptible to that. But in this case, they're saying if the virulence is low, you get exposed to very little bit of it, your portal of entry, it didn't get to the right portal of entry, and the person has antibodies and they're healthy, they're not likely to get sick. But if we look at other examples, we might say if the virulence of the pathogen is high and the person got exposed to a lot of it and it got through the right portal of entry, and on top of that, the person doesn't have any antibodies because they've never been exposed to the pathogen, and they're in moderate health, they might very well get sick. So it's not easy to figure out, will this pathogen cause disease? Because it's not just a simple yes or no. It's going to have a lot to do with how the person was exposed to the pathogen and what the pathogen is and what the host characteristics are. So you can look over this and see some of the outcomes of these different combinations of things. So all of these things together, the the susceptible host, the infectious agent, and whether the portal of entry has been reached. And that's going to have a big impact on determining if this pathogen can actually cause disease.